Your data is like gold to hackers, and they'll sell it to the highest bidder. Are you protected? McAfee helps shield you, blocking suspicious texts, malicious emails, and fraudulent websites. McAfee Secure VPN lets you browse safely, and its AI-powered text scam detector spots threats instantly. You'll also get up to $2 million of award-winning antivirus and identity theft protection, all for just $39.99 for your first year. Visit McAfee.com. Cancel anytime. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hello, everyone. I'm Therese Bottomley, editor of The Oregonian and Oregon Live. This is Beat Check with The Oregonian. Today, I'm talking to senior reporter Noelle Crombie about several troubling developments involving Oregon's prisons and its youth authority. Noelle, welcome back to Beat Check.
Hi, Therese. Thanks for having me.
So let's briefly make sure listeners understand the background. Oregon Youth Authority and the Department of Corrections are two distinct agencies with separate management. What they share is a role in imprisoning criminal offenders. The Oregon Youth Authority holds young people from age 12 up to age 24 in some cases, and they do that in various detention facilities. The Oregon Department of Corrections incarcerates adults who are serving prison sentences. But both agencies have been under fire for their treatment of people in their custody. So first, tell us about the medical care problems that you brought to light involving adults in custody in Oregon prisons.
Sure. As you noted, these two agencies play significant roles in Oregon's criminal justice system, and both have faced significant crises that impact the well-being and the welfare of the people they're supposed to monitor, guard, take care of. Regarding the Department of Corrections, I've reported on, for years, really, major sort of eye-popping cases and settlements involving families of incarcerated people or with incarcerated people themselves over allegations of poor medical care. I've also reported on cases where judges have taken the Department of Corrections to task for inadequate treatment, including a recent case where a judge held the agency in contempt. A few years ago, I reported on a case where a judge blasted the then chief medical officer, questioning his credibility. And I would say that was the first time we really got a clear sense of some potential dysfunction within the agency's health services system. At some point last year, the state hired an outside lawyer to review health services, and that report delved really deeply into the state of healthcare in Oregon's prisons. It looked at the complaints of physicians, the implications of the crisis for people who are doing time in the state's prison system. And the findings of that report were many and varied, and they led Michael Reese, who's a former Portland police chief and Multnomah County sheriff, who the governor has since tapped to lead the Department of Corrections, to fire the chief medical officer and that doctor's boss, who was a top-level administrator. So the agency has seen tremendous upheaval in the ranks of its medical services division, particularly in the last 6 months.
So you talked about some tension between the judge and the lawyers fighting for these inmates who are seeking care, but you also had difficulty getting information about this case.
Yeah, my colleague, well, first of all, trying to report on health services where there are so many privacy concerns about people who are receiving care is a significant obstacle. And my colleague, and then you're also dealing with HR concerns involving doctors, some of whom were on leave. Some of those leaves went on for very long periods of time. It sort of is a black box within the agency and is difficult to penetrate. We did encounter, my colleague Ted Sickinger and I did encounter problems obtaining this extensive complaint by one doctor who had written to the governor, the agency director, and others. The letter was detailed and it provided his own sort of experience as a prison physician. It, for us, represented an important document in that it offered a rare firsthand account from a doctor on the ground delivering care, on the front lines in Oregon's prisons. The governor took what we considered a long time to release that letter, and when her office did release it, it was redacted so extensively that it was difficult to really discern what the doctor was actually complaining about. For instance, the governor's office had redacted general references to medical specialties, diagnoses, prisoner health conditions. The redactions effectively shielded the department's decisions from public scrutiny. Luckily for readers, Ted and I did manage to obtain an unredacted copy so we could clearly see exactly what the doctor's complaints were.
So I suppose delivering healthcare in a prison environment is tricky and difficult, and it might be hard to recruit medical professionals to work in the prisons. But it does seem, Mike, and you mentioned you covered this for quite a while, there's always something going wrong, whether at Coffee Creek, where with women prisoners or elsewhere. So why is it so difficult to deliver quality healthcare to people in the state's prisons?
Yeah, I mean, pulling back, I mean, the Department of Corrections has long had challenges filling many roles in the agency, from corrections officers to medical staff. Look, I guess what I'd say about this is that from everyone we've spoken with, and this isn't going to be a surprise, listeners, that these are very challenging work environments for a variety of reasons. One doctor we spoke with acknowledged sort of the obvious when he told us that prisons aren't an in-demand place to work. The pay is decent, he said, but it certainly has a perception problem, which I think has contributed to the recruitment efforts.
Also, mental health issues in the population, I'm sure, and just all sorts of other things. So you mentioned Ted Sickinger, a watchdog reporter here, and you and Ted did some deep reporting that you mentioned into the problems, neglect and so forth. But, did anyone die that you know of, or what did you find in that deeper dive?
Yeah, among the things that I've reported on over the past year as we've really trained a spotlight on the agency and its health services is people have died, and including one man who last year his family received a record settlement of $3.5 million. His heart attack symptoms had gone untreated at the Oregon State Penitentiary. And I think it's important for listeners to understand that it is expensive for the state when the agency fails to provide medical care. It can be expensive, and we've seen that with some of these settlements.
Yeah, and again, that these people are completely under the care and control of the state. I mean, they can't just dial 911 if they have a heart attack symptom or demand to be taken to an emergency room. I mean, they are very vulnerable to the decisions made within the prison walls.
Yeah, they're completely obviously at the mercy of the Department of Corrections and the decision making of the physicians who are charged with caring for them. And one of the issues that the report showed was there was just a kind of a breakdown in some of the decision making around who qualified for care outside of the facility, specialist care.
Right, which is more expensive, and there might be a reluctance to just go run every test every time somebody complains. So very complicated situation. So the top two medical officers have been dismissed. The director, former sheriff and police chief Mike Reese, pledges changes, and so we will be watching to see how that develops. So let's turn now to the Oregon Youth Authority, which is oversees even more vulnerable populations. These are all very young people. So first of all, what sorts of crimes might result in somebody being sent to an OYA facility?
Yeah, the Youth Authority is responsible for people between ages 12 and 24 who commit crimes before age 18. And those crimes are typically very serious and can include assaults, very serious assaults, sex crimes, homicide, among other offenses.
And your reporting in this case also showed that there were a lot of complaints, both from young people and maybe staff, and nothing, again, seemed to get done.
Yeah, I reported last month on a massive review that was underway within the agency of its professional standards office. I would say this was a review that was not publicly announced. It was quietly being undertaken. The agency brought in an experienced Department of Corrections manager to come in and lead this effort, which is um, extremely complicated and time consuming. The review really focused on one unit within the Oregon Youth Authority, the Professional Standards Office. This was supposed to serve as, the entry point for reports that were related to the well-being and welfare and safety of youths under the Youth Authority's care. And that preliminary review, which took place in January, uncovered a large backlog of complaints that had not been either finalized or had gone nowhere or remained pending for a long time. And this backlog dated back years. And when the then agency director brought this information to the chief investigator, the then chief investigator, that investigator abruptly resigned. And we reported on that. And within an hour of our reporting, the agency's director himself was also put on paid leave by the governor. And
Yeah, so again, this watchdog reporting having immediate impact. And the director, as you say, was put on leave right away. And then what happened since then?
Well, the initial reporting, it was difficult to really parse out exactly the scope and scale of the review. And I mean, how many cases were we talking about, and how widespread was the failure of this unit? And so I put in a public records request for much more detailed records and information, trying to better understand the backlog. And on the eve of the agency's disclosure of those records in response to my request, Joe O'Leary, the longtime agency head, was fired. That took place last week.
And then some of the people who had been held in these facilities for youth offenders, they filed a very troubling lawsuit, making some very disturbing allegations. And this was covered by your colleague, Maxine Bernstein. So tell us about that lawsuit and how that intersects with these reports of abuse that were not investigated.
Yeah, like the Department of Corrections, the Oregon Youth Authority has been the subject of, honestly, a blizzard of lawsuits in OAA's case, alleging really disturbing conduct that's alleged to have harmed young people in custody. And Max reported, for instance, last week on one of those lawsuits. It was filed on behalf of 10 men who were held as boys at McLaren Youth Correctional Facility in Woodburn, who alleged that they were sexually abused by the prison's longtime chief medical officer.
So again, that intersection with vulnerable population, the medical system allegedly failing, more to come on that lawsuit. We'll be following that through the courts. And again, this is expensive for the state of Oregon. These lawsuits, as you have reported, against the prison system have cost. I think there was a man who lost his eye, and that was $1 million verdict. So it is very costly and important for Oregonians to know about. So we're going to put all the links to this terrific watchdog reporting in the episode notes. And with that, we'll call it a wrap. Thanks so much for listening to Beat Check with the Oregonian. If you like this show, give us a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find the show. Tell a friend, help spread the word. The best way to support our journalism and stories like this one is with a subscription to Oregon Live. You can do that at OregonLive.com/pod support. Until next time.